I came up with more answers than I had in the past, and probably twice as many questions as I got additional answers. So I would really appreciate your help, and this may affect Sunday. We may spend some more time on this because I think it's important, because there's I found a lot of information from not just necessarily commentators, but I guess those who make their living doing this, and a lot of alleged contradictions surround the post-resurrection appearances that I had never ran across before. That was, did anybody else run across that, such as the one angel, the two angels, and so on and so forth? So that was what perked my interest about midway through this order, as I was looking ahead and trying to figure out how to get all 26 lessons in. And I thought, it's either going to be a blast on lesson 26 or it's going to be a flop. So anyway, we will do what we can and try to make some sense out of this, and I hope that we come up with a little bit better understanding of what went on. Anyone need a copy of lesson 26? Okay, let's bow, go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We thank you for the mercies and grace that you have bestowed upon us this day. We're thankful to have a God that has revealed himself and declared of himself things that give us assurance. You've demonstrated your faithfulness to your word, your fulfilling of all the promises that you make, that gives us hope and confidence that you are in control, and it is wise to trust your ways, trust your will, and do your will, that it might be well with us, not only here, this side of eternity, but to ensure our entrance into the eternal kingdom. Thank you for this hour that you've granted us again. Thank you for the guidance, protection, and blessings of the day. May they continue into the night. Give us opportunity in the presence of our enemies to share the gospel. Give us boldness, wisdom relative to that, and to the raising of our families, and in promoting the unity that needs to be present, that the brethren here can continue to love, and the world will look at Southside and see a congregation of people who desire to be a part of us. Bless us and our understanding as we enter this study tonight, and same with all the classes and our brethren that are assembled this evening. We praise you and give you thanks for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, lesson 26, the resurrection of Jesus. I want to just mention a few things to give us a good setting real quickly on this. Before Jesus died, since we're going to open up with some things relative to these women who came to the tomb, okay? Mary Magdalene and other women. Before Jesus died, we read in Luke chapter 23 and verse 27 that there followed Jesus a great multitude of people and of women who bewailed and lamented him. And then after Jesus died on Friday, but before the Sabbath began. Again, in Luke chapter 23, beginning at verse 50, when we read of Joseph, he came, and it said of Joseph in Luke chapter 23, verse 51, that he had not consented to this counsel and deed of murder. Joseph went to Pilate. He was the one that went to Pilate, and he asked for the body of Jesus. You recall, Pilate was skeptical that Jesus had died so quickly, but he got that verified, and he gives Joseph Jesus' body, and it says in verse 53 of Luke 23 that Joseph took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid Jesus in a tomb hewn in stone where no man had ever yet lain. And it was a day of preparation. That's Friday. And the Sabbath drew on. Now notice verse 55. The women who had come with Jesus out of Galilee followed after Joseph and beheld the tomb where Joseph put Jesus' body. And then verse 56 of Luke 23, these women returned preparing spices and ointments. And then it closes with, and on the Sabbath day, everybody rested according to the commandment. John chapter 19, verse 38 beginning, it also mentions the account of Joseph, who being a disciple, but secretly for the fear of the Jews, asked of Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. He came therefore and took away Jesus' body. But then verse 39, who else? We see Nicodemus. Remember Nicodemus? There also came Nicodemus, who at the first came to Jesus by night, and he brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. And John's account says that they, Joseph and Nicodemus, they took the body of Jesus, bound it in linen cloths with spices, as was the custom of the Jews in burial. And again, it mentions that this was the place where they put Jesus, where he was crucified. There was the garden and the new tomb in the garden. There then, because of the Jews' preparation, which was the day before the Sabbath, they laid Jesus. So we have women that have already come to the place. They know where Jesus is going to be buried. That gets us now to everybody rests on the Sabbath. And so after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, and this is recorded in all four of the Gospels, Matthew 28:1, Mark 16:1 and 2, Luke 24:1, and John 21. On the first day of the week, these women are the first to come to the tomb of Jesus. And what was the reason that they came?
They wanted to see it. They brought spices that they had prepared.
They know where the tomb is. Yes, I'm sure they wanted to see if Jesus was there, because what has Jesus been telling them? After 3 days, okay? But they come to prepare because it has been 3 days, okay? That's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Mary Magdalena, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, they bought spices that they might come and anoint Jesus. It's very early on the first day of the week. They came when the sun was risen. What did they see when they arrived there, though? What had happened that caused the stone to be rolled away? And who caused the earthquake? An angel of God descended and caused an earthquake. And the angel is sitting on the door of the entrance. Okay? So, that's from Matthew chapter 28. Behold, there was a great earthquake, where an angel of the Lord descended and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. Look at verse 5 of Matthew 28. The angel answered and said to the women, "Fear ye not, I know that you seek Jesus, who has been crucified." And by the way, I'm reading from the American Standard Version, not New American, American Standard Version, if you find it's a little bit different wording. But the angel said, "Fear not, I know that you seek Jesus, who hath been crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, even as he said. Come and see the place where the Lord lay." And the angel continues to say, "Go quickly and tell who?" Okay? "Lo, he goeth before you," where? "To Galilee. There you will see Jesus." Verse 8, "So the women depart quickly from the tomb, fear and joy, and they ran to bring his disciples word." And now, who meets them? Jesus. Not at the tomb. They've left the tomb to go tell his disciples what the angel instructed them. What does Jesus, just summarize, what does Jesus tell them to do? Same thing, doesn't he? Go tell my brethren, where will you find me? Galilee. So that's Matthew's account. Then he quits. Tells us a brief thing about the soldiers, and it had mentioned earlier in Matthew 28 that when the earthquake happened, the guards that were there, they became as dead men. And it picks back up. They run, tell the authorities. The authorities tell them, we're going to get to that later, but they tell them basically, pay him off to tell him a lie that his body has been stolen. But Matthew ends with Jesus meeting the women as they're en route to tell his disciples. But then after the little the story of the encounter with between the guards and the Roman authorities, Matthew picks back up, and the disciples are in Galilee. Are they not? So there's a lot then that Matthew leaves out. There's a lot that happened in between this. Let's go to Mark's account. And again, we may not necessarily follow this tonight, but type in if you see that I'm amiss on this. Mark says when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalena, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, they bought spices that they might come anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, they come to the tomb when the sun was risen. Verse 4, looking up, they see that the stone is rolled back, for it was exceeding great. Now, verse 5 says, they enter the tomb. They see a young man sitting on the right side. Now remember, where was the angel in Matthew's account? In the tomb or on the stone outside the tomb? Okay. Here, Mark says, they enter the tomb. Now, remember that, because if I'm understanding this right, when they go, they run into Peter and John. The women do they not? Peter and John go back where? To the tomb to verify what Mary has told them. Does Mary follow them?
She must have, because that's where Jesus encountered her.
They go back to the tomb, Peter and John. They do not find Jesus. Then they go to their homes, but Mary stays. And someone speaks to her. She thinks it's a gardener. Finally, who is it? So does Mary go to the tomb twice?
Yes.
I'm thinking yes. So as Matthew's account take up, or Mark's account take up with a separate entrance than Matthew. But anyway, they enter the tomb. This is Mark 16:5. They see a young man sitting on the right side, arrayed in a white robe, and they were amazed. He saith unto them, be not amazed, you seek Jesus the Nazarene, who hath been crucified. He is risen, he is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. Look, this was where he was laid. Verse 7, but go tell his disciples. What does your Bible say there? Go tell his disciples and Peter. Well, Peter's a disciple.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
Yes.
And remember, Peter and John are going to go verify what Mary's told them. But go tell his disciples and Peter, Jesus is going before you into Galilee. There you'll see him, as he told you in the past. And they went out and fled from the tomb. The women did. They fled from the tomb, for the trembling and astonishment had come upon them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now, Strong's, Bullinger's, a lot of them point out, Bullinger's does in his figures of speech, that this is a figure of speech. They told, it's like you go to Disney World, you come back, and someone says, what was it like? What did you get to see? Oh, we saw everything. Well, now, did you see everything? Or did you just see the part that was allowed for the public to see? Did you see the behind the scenes? Did you go underneath where the employee? But we saw everything. That's kind of what Bullinger says is here. They said nothing to no one except the ones that the angel and Jesus told them to go tell, the disciples. So it's not a contradiction, okay? Mark adds in verse 12, after these things, Jesus was manifested in another form to two of them as they were walking on their way to the country, which we know that's Emmaus. As I looked it up, 60 furlongs, that's approximately 7 miles. Bethany is going to be mentioned. It's in another direction from Jerusalem. It's just a couple of miles. So this is the proximity of that. But anyway, Jesus appears to two who are on their way into the country, and they went away and told it unto the rest. Who's the rest?
The rest of the disciples.
Okay? But their story wasn't believed either. Okay? Verse 14. Keep in mind, this is all still on the first day of the week. Luke 24:13 and 33 bears that out. The two on the road to Emmaus. This is on the first day of the week. But verse 14 of Mark chapter 16 says, after that, Jesus was manifested unto the 11 as they sat at meat, and he upbraided them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them that had seen him after they had risen. Now, make a note of this. Look at it between now and Sunday. Mark chapter 12, verses 12 through 14, if I understand it right, corresponds to Matthew 28:16 through 20. That's in Galilee, what Mark is talking about. When we find, if you look at Mark chapter 16, when it tells us in verse 9 that Jesus appeared first to Mary Magdalene, verse 10, she went and told them that had been with him. Is that Peter and John? But in verse 12, we find a phrase, after these things something happened. He is manifested to the two. And then down to verse 14, and after that. So we have 3 different times we find the phrase, and after these things, this happened. And after, I think there's a time gap. When you read, after these things, that could have been days later. But as I'm going to show you the proof that I came up with here, verse 14 was an appearance in Galilee. You remember, the angel and Jesus had told the women, go tell my brethren, I go before them into Galilee. They will find me there. I think Mark 16:14 is having reference to that after what happened on the road to Emmaus, because Luke gives us a much more detailed account. So, let me find my sheet here. Then, let's pause there and go to Luke 24. Again, it picks up with the women. In the first verse, after they've rested on the Sabbath day according to the Mount, but on the first day of the week, early at dawn, these women came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. In verse 2, they found the stone rolled away, and they enter in. When they get inside, 2 men stand by them in dazzling apparel, and they are afraid, bowed down their faces to the earth, and they were told by these 2 men, remember what Jesus spake to you while he was yet in Galilee. And then it says they remembered these words and returned from the tomb and told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. And these women by name, in verse 10, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and other women with them, and they told these things to who? The apostles. Now there was others present, but the focus is, we have the mention, notice in verse 9 of the 11, and in verse 10, the apostles. That tells me Peter and John's there. You see that? Judas is gone, that leaves 11. So we got 11 disciples, or the 11 are the apostles, okay? Now verse 11. These words appeared in their sight as idle talk, and they didn't believe them. Now Luke tells us, but Peter and John ran to the tomb. Now, what company did they leave to run to the tomb? The 11 we know were there. Anybody else? Pardon?
The women.
Okay, so Luke just says Peter arose, but John's going to tell us that Peter and John. Peter arose, runs to the tomb, stooping and looking in, he sees the linen cloths by themselves, and he departs to his home, wondering at that which was to come to pass. Does Peter see Jesus? But there is two mentions that the Lord appeared to Cephas. Well, he's not yet. Has he? So, John 20, verses 3 through 10, that's how we know that John also went with Peter back to the tomb. And John says that they both go to their houses. So they've come to the tomb. They don't find Jesus. And they go home to their homes. But we're going to see Mary must have went back with them, because it says that she's there at the tomb weeping after they go home. And Jesus appears to her. Okay? So, did Mary have two visits by Jesus? The one on the way to tell the apostles, and then she comes back with Peter and John to the tomb, and Jesus appears. She first thinks he's a gardener, and she finally recognizes that he's not the gardener, he's Jesus. Jesus tells her again, go tell my brethren. Okay? Now keep in mind the question I asked you, who was Peter and John, who was in their company? Anybody else other than just the 11? When we address again the two on the road to Emmaus. So, verse 13 of Luke 24. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village, this is out in the country, we read earlier, named Emmaus, which was 80 furlongs from Jerusalem, and they communed with each other of all these things which had happened. Now they give us some details of what they know. And this sheds some light about what we've talked about. While they were communing and questioning together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But of course, they don't know it's Jesus yet. Their eyes have been forbidden. Okay? Verse 24. While we're there, let's take it up now. Verse 16, their eyes were holden that they should not know Jesus. He asked them, what's this communication between you two? We know one of them's name was Cleopas. He said, do you alone sojourn in Jerusalem, and you don't know the things that have come to pass there in these days? And Jesus says, what things? And they said, concerning Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priest and our rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we hope that it was he who should redeem Israel. Yea, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things came to pass. Now notice what they tell Jesus. They know. They have heard from who? Who did the women go tell? Disciples. Were they with the 11? How did they know? The report of Mary Magdalene and the other women who were instructed by the angel and instructed by Jesus, go tell my brethren, I'm going to Galilee. These two on the road to Emmaus, they knew of that. Moreover, verse 22 of Luke 24, certain women of our company amazed us, having been early at the tomb, and when they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Now notice who else they mention. And certain of them that were there with us went to the tomb. Class, who's that? Has to be Peter and John. So the two on the road to Emmaus were there when the women told them. And Peter and John left that assembly, goes to the tomb. Mary follows. They go home. Mary then is told to go tell his brethren. So verse 24 of Luke 24, certain of them that were with us, this is Peter and John, went to the tomb and found it as the women said, but who did they not see? So Peter has not yet seen Jesus. But Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:5, he was seen of Cephas. That's what I've not got figured out yet. Maybe it's just not recorded. But let's go on. He goes on to speed it up. He began from Moses, verse 27, and opened their understanding about what the scriptures. Verse 28, they go on, drew nigh to the village of Emmaus. He was going to go on, but they constrained him to stay there, and he does. He goes in, verse 30, and sits down with them and eats. He takes bread and blesses it and breaks it and gave it to them. And then, verse 31, this is now when they, for the first time, recognize, or it's revealed to them, this is Jesus. And he vanishes out of their sight. He didn't ascend to heaven, but he vanished. Whether he went up, backwards, or just became invisible, we don't know. But he vanished out of their sight. Now notice, back in verse 13, these two that were traveling to the country, to Emmaus, it was on that very day, first day of the week. Now look at verse 33. It's still the first day of the week, because after Jesus vanishes from their sight, that very hour, where do they go? They go from Emmaus 7 miles back to Jerusalem and found the 11 gathered. So Peter and John's here. Now, if you can add all this up, you tell me how many appearances there's been so far, because I don't know. I'm just trying to.
If you count Peter, there's been 4.
All right. I told Mary, I said, I'm just going to get up here and say, I don't know this, but Mary does. I'm going to turn the class over to her. Or Carol does, rather. Anyway.
Can't find out where he saw Peter either.
There's your homework for Sunday. But I hope this is interesting. Let's go on. They rose up that very hour, returned to Jerusalem, find the 11, and them that were with them. So we've got the 11 plus some. And they told them the Lord is risen indeed. And what do they say? He's appeared to Simon. Well, when? When? It's just not recorded, all I can come up with. Michael, you got any?
No, I agree.
Mickey? Jeff? Have you ever, anybody? Okay. The Lord is risen and hath appeared to Simon. And they rehearsed the things that happened to them in the way, how Jesus was known of them as they broke bread. And as they spake these things, who appears? How many? What appearance is this? 5. Paul says 5. Okay. But Jesus appears and says to them, peace be still. They're affrighted, terrified, and thinks it's a spirit. He shows them his hands and his feet. He tells them, handle me and see. Yet he's going to tell the women, don't touch me. So, Verse 40, when he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet, and they still disbelieved for joy, not necessarily lack of faith. Put yourself, you're seeing someone 3 days after death. So, and he's given a piece of broiled fish, he eats it, and here, Luke records basically the Great Commission, his version of it, tells them to remain in Jerusalem until the promise of the Father comes upon them, and leads them out until they are over against Bethany. Bethany was about 2 miles from Jerusalem, okay? He goes over against Bethany, lifts up his hand, blesses them. And what does verse 51 open up with? And after these things, that's another way of saying after these things. So I think we have a time gap between verse 50 and 51. In other words, it didn't happen. After all these events, sometime later, we know we've got 50 days that Jesus was on earth. This is the first day of the week. So it came to pass, while he blessed them, that he parted from them and he ascends. This is the Acts account of Jesus' ascension, is it not? Or does it just simply mean he vanished out of their sight like it said earlier? I'm not certain on that. But they return to Jerusalem and stay there. Now that is Luke's account. Now, let's go to John's account. Any questions so far? John chapters 20 and 21. We got the first day of the week. Mary Magdalene comes early. It was yet dark. She sees the stone taken away from the tomb. Write this down to study between now and Sunday. I think there's a time gap between verse 1 and 2. It says that she runs to tell Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and tells them, they've taken my Lord away. I think it's likely that there's a gap in time between verses 1 and 2. So Peter, because when she says in verse 2, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, we do not know where they have laid him. Peter therefore went forth, and the other disciple go to the tomb. Well, we've already read in the other 3 accounts, other things happened before this. Mary was at the tomb twice, was she not? Or she's going to be at the tomb. She's only been there once. Matthew said the angels and Jesus told the women, go tell my disciples. As they're en route to tell the disciples, Jesus meets them. Tells them to go tell the same thing. So here it says, when Mary sees the stone rolled away, I don't think she went inside. I think she left, did these things and come back. And when she comes back after Peter and John, that's when she goes inside. Look at that and see. Because we know she's at the tomb 2 times. But anyhow, it tells us about Peter and John's going to the tomb, concluding with verse 10, they went away to their own home. They have not seen Jesus at the tomb. Okay, verse 11. But Mary was standing without at the tomb weeping, and now she enters this conversation with someone. Is it the angel? Well, we say she beholds 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the foot, because she's looking into the tomb. And she sees where the body of Jesus had been laying. And they tell her, why are you weeping? She said, because they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. When she said thus, she turned herself back, and she beheld Jesus, but she didn't know it was Jesus. She didn't recognize him. Jesus says, "Why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said, "Sir, if thou hast borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said, "Mary." She turns, says to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which is to say, teacher. And Jesus says, "For whatever reason, touch me not, for I'm not yet ascended into the Father. But go where?" Now, is that, "Go to my brethren," is that Matthew's account? Like I say, has Matthew skipped a whole lot? Those are things that I'm just not sure about yet. But he tells her, "Go to my brethren, tell them that I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." Verse 18 of John 20. Mary Magdalene cometh and tell the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. I think verse 18 corresponds to Matthew 20 and verse 10. Look at that. But this is the first day of the week. Now look at verse 19. When it was at the even on that day, the first day of the week, the doors were shut, the disciples where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews. Jesus appears in their midst, saying, "Peace be unto you." Again, he showed them his hands and his side. They were glad when they saw the Lord. Is this the same thing that we read in Luke? There they were scared to death and couldn't believe it for joy. Is this the same incident? Jesus says, "Peace be unto you. As the Father has sent me, even so send I you." And I think, incidentally, that's John's version of the Great Commission, a one verse. As the Father has sent me, even so send I you. When he said this, he breathed on them and saith, "Receive the Holy Spirit. Whosoever sins you forgive, they are forgiven. Whosoever sins you retain, they retain." But who was not present? Thomas was not present. But this is the first day of the week. 8 days later, Jesus appears again. Who's present that wasn't present? 8 days. May appear to be a week and a day, but they count Sunday to Sunday. This is the following Sunday. It's still on day one of the next week. After 8 days, his disciples were within. Thomas was with them. And we read about that. And then verse 20 closes. Then chapter 21, it opens with what phrase? Another, after these things, a gap in time. How many days after this was it? We don't know. But remember what the angel and Jesus had said in Matthew? Where will you find Jesus? And incidentally, take notice, back in Matthew 28, I didn't bring it out, but when we go back, turn back real quick to Matthew's account. Matthew 28, after we read about the lies and the bribe between the guards and the rulers, verse 16, notice what it says. Doesn't mention the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias, but it mentions a mountain. The 11 disciples went into Galilee unto the mountain where Jesus had appointed them. So evidently there was a specified or a designated place, a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. That's where you'll find me. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but still yet, says some doubted. Just want to point that out. But now back to John 21. A time gap. After all these things, I told you I had more than I hope this is not confusing you. Just take note. Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples where? Which is the Sea of Galilee. So they're in Galilee, but not at a mountain. They were 7 disciples or 7 apostles mentioned. Not 11, but 7. And it goes on to describe the conversation about what Peter did, the catching of the fish, 153. And Jesus says in verse 12, "Come and break your fast." None of the disciples inquire of him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. Now what does verse 14 say? This is the third time. So how many appearances were there of Jesus? And which three? Is it referring to 3 times when they were assembled? But there's only 7 here. This is what I'm confused on. I've just tried to put it in order. I've got some answers that I didn't have before, but I still have a lot of questions. But it says in John chapter 21, verse 14, this is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he had risen from the dead. So after they ate, you have the conversation. He asked Peter 3 times, what? And one of the questions I'll try to fast forward to it. What was the purpose of this exchange between Jesus and Peter? What did you understand that Jesus was? What point was he wanting Peter to grasp, or what lesson?
I think he was wanting Peter to know that he had forgiven him and that he wanted him to take the role.
Okay.
And
What does he tell Peter to do, class?
feed my sheep.
What else does he tell him? He tells him to feed my sheep 3 times. That's true. I'm not minimizing that. But look at verse 19. When follow me. Peter asked him about what's going to happen to John. Follow me. What's Jesus? Why does he say that? What's another point from this conversation? In verse 22, follow thou me. Says it twice. Remember Matthew 16:24? Jesus had touched upon this before in Matthew 16, verse 24, talking about what I think is one of the, if not the main subject of his teaching. He said to his disciples, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. What does he tell Peter? Twice. Follow me. How often do we worry about or think about or question about someone? Follow Jesus. Focus upon your responsibility. I think that's a good point to end upon. So we have that. This last appearance of Jesus, I don't know what the last appearance was, unless you take it the 500 brethren, 1 Corinthians 15:6. But I hope this has been a little bit, I don't know if that's the last slide or not. The Great Commission, we didn't get to that. We'll try to get to that, but we've got more. He tells them, of course, to remain in what city? Until they be endued with power from on high, and that's the coming of the Holy Spirit. That's one of the reasons we know that the Holy Spirit was who was meant. And so, what are we doing Sunday? One of the things, we'll touch some more on this, but I want you to try to remember this or write it down. What stands out to you that what little we've touched upon it? What was the main thing that Jesus' message of his teaching? What was the purpose of his miracles? What was the purpose of his teaching? Think about how effective would his miracles have been without any teaching? then think about how effective would his teaching have been if he had been like John the Baptist and performed no miracles. Was John an effective teacher? He performed no miracle. Which was more important, miracles or the teaching? Okay? So, I hope you've learned some things you didn't. We'll address some more of this sequence and see what you can find out, and we'll wrap this up Sunday. Thank you.